deck around the flavour of your favourite film, TV show or book is one of the most creative ways to express yourself in EDH. As one of both mine and Nathan's favourite films is the 1997 Studio Ghibli epic, Princess Mononoke, the urge to build a deck based on the film finally became too great for Nathan when the Jumpstart set provided us with the legendary creature, Marath of the Dire Hunt. Welcome to Magic the Flavouring, the Magic the Gathering podcast, where we talk about all things magic flavour design and lore. I'm your host, Andy Mann.
Hello, this is Nathan Cancel.
And today we have a pretty exciting episode. I'm going to do very little talking in this episode, which I think some of you out there in the world may be quite glad, because I did, especially in the last episode, I listened back to it in the edit and I went, holy shit, I waffle on for a long time. But this is going to be a Nathan episode today, because Nathan, you are presenting to us in its glory, in its entirety, your Princess Mononoke Flavour deck tech. Is this right?
It is indeed, yeah. So when I was looking, I think it was when Yashan came out with Zendikar Rising, I was looking at it, I was like, well, that just looks like the Okoto, the big board from Princess Mononoke. And then I looked at Marath of the Die Hunt, I was like, well, that's literally Princess Mononoke from Princess Mononoke. I was like, well, I mean, at that point, we kind of have to do the, and it was at that point I was like, well, okay, we have to look at maybe doing a theme deck, because you already did a theme deck. And it's one thing that I thought was interesting that that I only noticed about an hour ago was that when you did your theme deck, what colours did you choose?
Esper.
Yeah, so I've gone for Naya. So it's quite nice that we've managed to complement each other on the fact that I haven't gone down the blue or black route whatsoever. And obviously I've gone down the so the way I looked at it was that what kind of, okay, if I was to try and formulate this in my head, what would be the commander? Because I was thinking originally just to do it as Marath, but if I wanted Yashan in the deck, it kind of needs to be Naya colours. So at that point, I was like, okay, let's have a look at some options for commander. I looked at Marathon because it looks very much like the Spirit of the Forest, but it's in its half transformed form. It's got like, you know, a human face and a kind of an animalistic body, so it kind of fit in that kind of weird elk kind of image that you get of the Spirit of the Forest to begin with. I also looked at potentially doing Omnath, because Omnath because he had multiple different colours, so we could maybe incorporate more. But the problem is that when he got white, it went to 4 colours, and I kind of didn't want to do the blue side of it. So we settled on what I think is actually a pretty obvious choice, which is Marath, Will of the Wild. And I think not only does he visually look very similar to the Spirit of the Forest that we see in its initial, like, you know, animalistic form, but it also managed to get both Marath and Yashan together. And then from that point, as soon as I realised that Marath, Will of the Wild could front the deck and do it pretty much, it almost feels deliberate in the way that it's been been drawn by Tyler Jacobs here. It does actually look like he's taken inspiration from the film as well. From that point, I was like, well, okay, yeah, cool, I guess we're doing it. So I mean, the thing I like about the film is it does have a load of different factions, and we put a little post out on Twitter, where you did specifically. We got an answer back of one person saying, okay, well, if you're going to do this, maybe you could do 4 different decks. You could do, you know, the humans of Irontown, you could do the Imperials, you could do the Wilds, and maybe you could do like the 4 different factions. My answer to that was, I ain't got the fucking time. Okay, I can't make 4 bloody decks, and then don't get me wrong. If down the road we might do, we if we're doing like gameplay stuff or whatever, then we might be able to do like a 4-way Mononoke, battle royale. But as it stands, what I've tried to do is create a deck that shows both sides of the two warring factions, the humans and the spirits, and how they clash together. So there's a lot of like attacking themes into the deck. There's a lot of specific like notes from the film, as well as the characters themselves having specific cards to them. So between all of that, I think we've got something that works as a cohesive deck in some fashion. There are some bends on some characters, and there are some bends in the cards to try and make things fit together. Not every card is a flavour home run like Marath of the Dire Hunt, who specifically Villeneuve said is inspired by Mononoke. So there are some choices that are a little more abstract, I guess you could say. But for the most part, I think I've done a pretty decent job of catching most of the main themes, most of the main characters in the film, and made it feel like a succinct deck. So yeah, it's been interesting. Like I had a load of disclaimer first and foremost is that I'm not the only one who's done this. No. There are a few Mononoke decks out there. A couple of them were quite interesting because they came from back in like the Kamigawa times. So a lot of it relied specifically on the abstract kami for the spirits, which I didn't really want to do. I wanted to have like you pick up the card, you go, oh okay, so why is that in the deck? You go, well that's this person. And they go, well, like, okay, that's because okay, that makes sense. So that kind of idea. I didn't want it to be too abstract. I wanted it to be quite specific, card to card, for specific moments in the film, specific themes of the film, or specific characters within the film. So,
Sure.
yeah.
For those of you that don't know the Princess Mononoke film, if you've been living under a rock, but not everyone watches anime. It is an anime from the Studio Ghibli sort of franchise, and Studio Ghibli is obviously a massive name in anime nowadays. This film is their 1997 film, Princess Mononoke, which was adapted for English audiences by Neil Gaiman. So Neil Gaiman also had a hand in adapting it as well, which is pretty cool. The English voice cast is funny because with anime, whether it's Studio Ghibli or TV shows or whatever, there's always a dub versus sub argument. But Mononoke is one of these ones where the English cast is just stacked and really
it's phenomenal,
good.
Isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just looking at the IMDb now. You've got Billy Crudup, you've got Billy Bob Thornton, Minnie Driver, John DiMaggio, Claire Danes, John Diamata, Jada Pinkett Smith, Gillian Anderson, Keith David, Corey Burton, Tara Strong. It's just on and on and on. And yeah, it's just absolutely fantastic. It's also one of their longer ones, I believe. It's around 134 minutes, which is over 2 hours, which is pretty chunky. It's a fantasy epic, and yeah, I don't know if we have time to run through the entire plot here, but if you have any interest in watching any sort of anime or Studio Ghibli, whether you've watched any of it or if you haven't, Princess Mononoke is one of those ones which it's like peak Studio Ghibli. So yeah.
And it's not necessarily the same vein of like Howl's Moving Castle, Spirited Away, where you kind of get dropped. You go on an adventure into a world of magic and mystery. You're more kind of just dropped straight in the middle of a conflict of warring factions. The idea is this is kind of back when the spirits of the world and everything still manifested. It's kind of I don't know kind of what year they were looking at. It's about 1300s to 1300 to 1500s in terms of like human like history.
Sure.
It's not like one of these modern ones where like House of Castle is a bit of steampunk, or say Spirited Away set in like a modern day kind of society.
Yeah, it's still sort of feudal Japan, and the weaponry like guns. So guns in the film play quite a big part, especially in the kind of second and third act. But they're still in their kind of hand cannon phase as opposed to pistols or rifles. They're still in their kind of pre blunderbuss but sort of post cannon phase. So yeah, industry is there, but it's still very much like feudal Japan era.
Yeah, so basically, the main story is we find ourselves following a guy called Ashitake, Prince Ashitake, who. I'm not going to go through the entire plot, but basically he finds himself corrupted from a boar god who's been shot by Lady Eboshi. He then goes to find the source of the corruption, and then he finds himself in the middle of a big battle between Irontown, who is like a settlement that's been established that mines iron from the local area to create weapons, so that so they can protect themselves against the wilds, which are trying to fight back, because obviously industry and nature don't necessarily coalesce very well. So it's very good. It's got some big sweeping themes to it. It is a bit tragic at points because you can sympathise with both sides. There isn't necessarily there is a good and a bad to a degree, but most of it kind of sits in this moral grey area. There's very like you can kind of what's what I'm looking for. You can understand both sides of the argument, basically. So the main part. So we're going to go through the cast first and foremost. The first being Ashitaka, Prince Ashitaka. Now, I had to try and I struggled a little bit for this. I'm also actually going to ask you what you thought what you settled on, because I have two. For a couple of the characters, I'm going to show a card at the beginning of the story, how we find them to begin with, and then kind of how we see them at the end, to kind of see a progression. Plus, it means that we can kind of it's not a very large cast of people, so there would have been quite a small number of creatures in the deck otherwise. So who did you settle on for Prince Ashitaka?
Yeah, so Prince Ashitaka is an interesting one, as you say, because he's the main protagonist throughout the film. Even though the film is called Princess Mononoke, the story is unfolded through Ashitaka's journey, and he ends up on both sides of the conflict, whether it's the industrial Iron Town or whether it's the kind of pro-wilds, pro-nature Princess Mononoke and spirit side of the conflict. So he is an interesting one. I don't think any of mine are correct. So I've got 4 options.
Wow, okay.
Well, I mean, 3.5, 3.5. So the first one I put down is Samet, Voice of Dissent. So if we're working in Naya colours, she's obviously a Naya commander, a Gruul creature with a white ability. I just like the fact that she's very combat ready and the fact that she is willing to kind of change her opinions as she goes, because Samet is obviously an Amonkhet native. She's fully invested in the whole system of the trials and Amonkhet until she sees the truth of the situation, and she very quickly becomes like the voice of dissent, which is her creature card, right? So I thought that might work for him. Also, I had Gired, Conclave Exile, the commander, pre-con commander that creates Rhino tokens. Again, someone who's part of a system that then gets exiled because Ashitaka, once he becomes corrupted by the blight that's affecting all the wood spirits, gets exiled from his own town to have to go off and find what's creating this blight. So I like the idea of someone being in exile, someone being part of many different factions that has to kind of fight for one side or another. Again, not quite right. And then the last kind of one I picked was, this one's really wrong, but I kind of liked the idea, is Sylvia Brightspear and Corvath Brightflame, the Boros partners from Battle Bond, if only because throughout the film, the bond between Ashitaka and his steed, Yakul, which is a kind of like a springbok kind of thing, like a deer, they're seen very much as being like a team, like a partner. And this is what kind of Ashitaka, you sort of see his connection with nature, as well as him being quite a fierce warrior, like in the beginning, which kind of leads to his ability to kind of flip between all these different factions and fit in. I liked that. Yakul doesn't fly, so a dragon is the best representation.
Yeah,
but I also quite like it. I mean, there are other ones as well. Like Ashitaka is primarily an archer, so obviously all the archers are magic, like Halal the Fire Fletcher and whatever else. But yeah, those are my ones. I think out of those ones, I think Gired is the most. Or no, Samut's my one for it. Let's go with Samut.
Cool. Well, I mean, it's funny. I looked at all of those as well. I mean, the same kind of similar idea. I mean, there's flexibility sometimes on mechanic, and there's sometimes flexibility on theme. And sometimes when you look at something, you go, I mean, it makes sense thematically, but yeah, as you say, Yakul isn't a dragon. So, what I ended up on for the beginning of the film, how we find him, is Ranger on Vec. Now, this is a 2/2 first strike. Soldier Scout. He's 1 white and a green, and he has a green ability to regenerate. Now, I like this because not only does he have a bow and arrow, so it fits into his archer status, he has first strike, which obviously plays even more into this idea of archery, and as you'll see throughout the film, by the way, if you haven't seen the film, go and watch it after this because it's a phenomenal film. But his arrow prowess is insane. Once he gets corrupted, he can basically one-shot and decapitate people with his bow and arrow, which is very impressive. So I like the fact that we see him nice and meek at the beginning. He's just a 2/2. He's just a normal soldier just going through life. But also, at the end, spoilers, he does get over his corruption. He does get cured. So, I mean, that regenerate ability also works quite well. For the end of the film, how we find him, I had him for Tolsmir. Friend to wolves, which I think works very nicely. No, he's not an elf, but at the same time, at the end of it, I do like the fact that he does become very he bonds with Sun, who's like the wolf princess, and he does essentially become a friend to the wolf spirits by the end of it. And I like this idea that basically, thematically, I wanted there to be a few fight effects in the deck, and Tolsmir, Friend to Wolves, not only comes in with a 3/3 wolf, but also whenever a wolf comes in, you gain life and it fights something. So I thought mechanically and thematically that worked quite nicely. Looking at Yakul himself, as much as he isn't necessarily an elk, he's more of like as you say, like a springbok, like an antelope kind of thing. I did have him down for Great Sable Stag. A representative thing. Not only is it a 3/3 that can't be countered, it also protection from blue and from black throughout the film. He does get attacked by a lot of things. Nothing really gets it down. By the end of it, he still survives. There is a moment, however, in the beginning of the film where Ashitaka is riding him, and he is absolutely streaking it down through the forest, and it looks insane. So for that, I've also put in Pathbreaker Ibex, because if you look at the Pathbreaker Ibex artwork, it's pretty much the exact same shot of him barreling through all of the undergrowth. So I like this idea of not seeing him kind of as it stands as an animal, but then also active. And the goat's not too far away from an antelope, right?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Exactly. Also under the Ashitaka category, we have Hisama. Hisama was the elder of the village that tells him that starts him on his quest. I've put her down as for eternal witness. I was going to put male of the anima, but there wasn't quite enough creatures that had high power, because you need to have creatures that have at least 5 or more power for her ability to work. So I thought eternal witness is good because she's like a seer. She predicts kind of what's going to happen in the future. It works quite nicely in that regard. For his bow of Nihilus seemed like a pretty good option. Not only to give your attacking creatures death touch, which, as I said, if you watch how he fires that thing, it is lethal. It also is nice. It gives a little bit of mechanical diversity, because it does a lot of little bitty things, but mostly it's there for the fact of the attacking creatures getting death touch. In the same fashion, I put Avenging Arrow into the deck. It's a nice removal spell, destroys an attacking creature. Again, the arrows that he fires are insanely powerful, and I thought it was quite nice to have his shots kind of represented in the deck, as well as at the end. These corruptions, as I say, does get cured. I've put Miraculous Recovery in. Now, Miraculous Recovery returns a creature from your graveyard to the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter on it.
Nice.
So I think that represents him as a character quite nicely. It shows not only his steed and himself, it kind of sees a little bit of his background, and also his weaponry. So I think that all works quite nicely. Now his bow, so I'm not going to say love interest, because really, like, as much as there is a connection between him and Sun, who's a lass whose parents, when confronted by the wolf spirit, Moro, basically abandon the baby as payment to not get eaten themselves. And instead of eating the baby, Moro brings it up to be one of her own. So because of that, I had to put Raised by Wolves in the deck.
Yeah,
a 3/3 enchantment. When it comes into play, you get 2 wolf, 2/2 wolves, and the enchanted creature gets +1/+1 for each wolf in play. Now that's a Flavour home run right there. As much as it's weird because the images and the cuddle like a cat, we ignore some of the artwork. And also another thing that's good with theme decks is you can do alterations. There's a few decks out there. People have done Mononoke decks where they've started doing like a full alteration on the entire 60 or 100 card decks, depending on what format they were playing it for. So that's one that you could definitely do. For Sun herself, we've already mentioned Naeth of the Dire Hunt was specifically drawn to be representative of Princess Mononoke. Annoyingly, it was one of the first cards that I bought, and because of Jumpstart, it was really difficult to get hold of, but I think it's absolutely worth it. She's very cool because she... whenever one or more creatures you control fights or blocks, draws a card, and then at the beginning of your combat on your turn, you pay 2 in of red or green to double a creature's power until end of turn, and it must be blocked this combat if able. Now, throughout the film, Sun is really aggressive. Not only is she aggressive, but she was brought up by wolves, so the wolves are also very aggressive. They go around causing all kinds of fuss, so I thought that represented her very, very well. There is a moment in the film where she goes by herself to attack Irontown. Well, not by herself. She gets led up to the walls and then thrown over the wall by one of her wolves to go and basically assassinate Lady Eboshi. Weirdly enough, this is where I have Samut Voice of Dissent, because it plays very much into this idea that she's because she, as much as she is like a human, she isn't a human by any stretch. She doesn't consider herself to be on the human side, and she goes absolute hell for leather, and she's completely unconquerable until Ashitaka has to step up, be a big man, knock 2 women out, and then kidnap her back to her own tribe.
Yeah, that super aggressive attitude.
Yeah, white knighting, and then for a bit of power, a bit of slashy power at the end, she settled down a little bit, but she still has obviously the connection to wolves. So I have Selvala, Heart of the Wilds, for how we see her at the end. She's a little bit more amicable. She's a little bit less fighty, but it also has this is where I had the difficulty of going, well, I kind of think the deck is going to have multiple versions of the same character. Not only do you get guaranteed to see them as you're playing the deck more, but sometimes characters throughout a film, especially a long one like this, have differing sides that you want to see to them. This is going to be really interesting going forwards for Shigo's character. The wolves themselves, Moro is Wolfbriar Elemental, because she's not actually she is a wolf, but she's a wolf spirit. She's a wolf elemental. So I put Wolfbriar Elemental in because it creates a bunch of 2/2 wolves. The more green man you put into it, I thought that was quite because she's like the alpha. She's the mum of the tribe, of the spirit tribe. However, the 2 pups that we do see throughout the film are represented by Zerda and Wicked Wolf. Zerda because it helps Marath's activated abilities. Not only that, but it also has a tap to stop a blocker ability, which I think works quite well. And then Wicked Wolf ties into this fighting effect, as well as being because I wanted a couple of the wolves in. Weirdly enough, there aren't that many good wolves in Magic, so I was also going to go for Witch Stalker and Fierce Witch Stalker. because they do stalk Lady Eboshi, but I don't think of Eboshi as being much of a witch, even if they might consider her to be a massive antagonist. I kind of understand her point of view, and plus, Fierce Witch Stalker isn't. I mean, they're not as good as the other two. So yeah, the other one is I've put a land for Sun in, and that's Keswick Wolfrun. I feel like you need to have. Because lands are interesting. I was originally going to just go with a load of basics, but there are actually a lot of Naya coloured lands that fit quite nicely into the theme, that fit quite nicely aesthetically. And Keswick Wolfrun for me again was a home run in terms of like, again in the film you see the wolves barreling down the side of the mountain, and it kind of, you know, this represents that moment for me. Did you have anyone for Sun?
I mean, no. I think as far as Sun goes, you know, the eponymous Princess Mononoke. I think that's perfectly right. I mean, Knife the Dire Hunt, as you say, Magali Villeneuve was quoted on Twitter as saying that Mononoke was a big inspiration in the design of that character. I like that you have Sylvala Heart of the Wilds, as you say, because yeah, it's I mean, more amicable makes it sound like she's more placid, I suppose, but yeah, she's definitely less vengeful. So taking the red out of that character as a kind of end of the journey, making her be the sort of green-white, you know, sort of friend to nature is definitely a good step, and you know, it's still incredibly powerful as well as a card and as a character. So I think that that's a good little through line there for sure.
Okay, cool. Right, so now we're moving on to I guess the antagonists of the or the people that were presented to be like, you know, to fight against the wilds. Lady Eboshi is the head of Irontown. She was a pirate back in the day, and we don't get too much on her backstory, but basically she is the leader of the town. She is built it up. She is lauded by her entire population by being not only a fighter for those that are less privileged. She also has generated industry, given people jobs. Essentially, this is where the grey area kind of comes in, because she's not actually bad from a human point of view, but from a nature point of view, obviously she's damning the land by gutting it for all of its resources, cutting down forests, all of that nonsense. At the beginning, I have her down as Lena, Selfless Champion. This is someone who a character would. A card, when it comes in, it creates 1/1 tokens equal to the number of creatures you have. This idea of growing the community, and she can sacrifice herself to give indestructible to all creatures that have less power than her. This idea that she's willing to lay down her life to protect those that are less you know, able than she is, which I think is a nice thing at the beginning. I was originally going to put Captain of the Watch, because the same idea of when we first meet her with a load of soldiers that come in, and again it's a female presented character on the card art, but I've put Captain of the Watch into like the Irontown residents to kind of represent, you know, the populace that she represents. Funnily enough, at the end of the film, again, spoilers, there is going to be some spoilers here, she has her right arm bitten off by a wolf. Now, Winota, joiner of forces, has had her right arm bitten off by a wolf. This is the point of where my brain went, oh god, yeah, we can literally go full ham on the themes on some of these characters, which is kind of what I've done for a few of them. And I thought this was a really good idea. Not only does her trigger whenever a non-human attacks, okay, yes, it's on your side. You go and search a library for a human, put it into play, tap to attacking. This idea of the more non-humans attack, the more humans attack back kind of idea. Yes, okay, they're not attacking back. They're both attacking your side. And, you know, you're taking advantage of both sides of the war. But I liked this idea. And at the end, she does have a moment of brevity where she's like, oh, actually, let's start again. Let's start better. Let's do better. Which is quite a nice ending to it. And again, okay, maybe the thematic doesn't necessarily work exactly, but I think it works quite. I think not only visually for the fact that she'd lose her right arm to wolf, I think that was kind of made it. That was the final nail in the coffin for me. I was like, cool, we're doing this. And it also meant that I did then have to try and balance out a number of non-creatures and humans, sorry, non-humans and humans for the creature side to try and make that work, which is good. I mean, again, it was a nice deck challenge on top of something that's already a little bit more, you know, specific in your needs. Representing the people within Irontown, Gonza is her like lieutenant. He's represented by Isao, like enlightened Bushi, who's only a small dude, but when he's got Bushido 2 and it can regenerate a samurai. I like this idea. Not only does he not die throughout the entire thing, plot armor, but is in the artwork he's got the big long sword that he has in the film as well. Masako the Humorless represents Toki, who humorously puts up with Koroku, who's like they're both characters that get a little bit more story to them, a little bit more characterization. She allows your creatures to block even if they're tapped, which is good because at the end of the film, she gets left to defend Irontown when Eboshi and all the Imperials go to fight the Boar tribe. So I think that works quite nicely there thematically. Koroku is also in the deck. He's Cho Mano Revolutionary. He's a 4-mana 2/2 that prevents all damage to him because he goes through, basically, at the beginning of the film, Ashitaka finds him and another Irontown soldier after a battle between the wolves and Lady Eboshi's troops, and miraculously he makes it and he survives. So the prevent all damage to him kind of represents, like, you know, his plot armor, which I thought was a bit of a tongue-in-cheek way of having a card represent plot armor, which I thought was quite funny. For Miko, the low bloods is in the deck, representing the ladies of the night, because they are of low blood. You know, they don't have any nobility to them. It's also another samurai that fits in nicely into the theme. For the town itself, I've got Vance's blasting cannons, which I think works quite nicely. There aren't a lot of guns in Magic, and cannons didn't necessarily fit the rifle theme quite so well, but Vance's blasting cannon kind of fits this idea of Irontown and the fact it's defended by munitions. Hanway Garrison, again, the artwork as well shows this idea of troops sat along a battlement, very similar to what happens in the film. And I did mention earlier that Lady Eboshi takes in lepers. She's one of the only people that doesn't look at them as, you know, horrible, nasty plague bearers. Abu Jafar is a single white mana for a 0/1. When it dies, destroy any creature that's blocking or blocked by it. It's the only card in Magic that's a leper. It even says in its original printing, summon leper, which works really nicely also with Neith's ability to force blocks. So I thought that not only thematically got a leper into the deck, but it also actually works mechanically within the set as well. For a few of the lands, Wooded Bastion, Slayer's Stronghold, Sacred Foundry, because it is an ironworks, and Anhava Township. Anhava Township's a weird one from Homelands. The taps for a colourless, or you can pay 1 to tap for a red, pay 2 to tap for a green, or pay 2 to tap for a white. So not only does it get all of our colours, but the artwork of it looks very, very similar to Irontown as well. So yeah, that's Irontown in a nutshell. Who did you have for Lady Eboshi?
So I had for Lady Eboshi, I put down a Kiri Fearless Voyager, which is a new one from Zendikar, because Eboshi, her whole thing is that she wants to arm all these downtrodden people and make sure that they have the means to defend themselves, whether it's from the spirits of the wild or whether it's from the kind of feudal lords, I suppose is the right term for them, that are kind of trying to take over all the different areas and trying to take over Irontown from Lady Eboshi. So a Kiri Fearless Voyager, when other creatures are equipped, therefore they have weapons, they draw cards and sort of gain knowledge and gain resources, which is what Eboshi is trying to do for her town. So that's what I've done. I did a Kiri Fearless Voyager. Okay. I don't know if it works in any other sort of respect, but I do like the fact that it's a legendary that rewards you for having multiple armed creatures.
I like that. Yeah, I do like that. That's nice.
Yeah.
Cool. So now our other antagonist, we meet him at the beginning as a monk or a monk-like figure. This is Jigo, and he's interesting because even the creator of him couldn't decide between a ninja, a mercenary, a spy, or a religious man. So he kind of gave him lots of different bits of all of them and married him all together into one character. At the end, he's kind of our main force that's trying to continue to kill the spirit of the forest and bring back the head as a prize to the emperor, because the emperor believes it will bring him immortal life, and obviously he just wants to get nice and paid. So by the end of it, he is a bit of a douche nodule, but we do see him at the beginning as this kind of like as a monk kind of person. So for the monk side of it, I have Serene Master, a card that came out in one of the recent commander sets. 0/2, when it blocks a creature, you swap it and the blocked creature's power, which is interesting because at the end we don't really think of him as having any fighting prowess, and then out of nowhere at the end he confronts Ashitaka and he turns out he's a sprightly little motherfucker, kind of like Yoda, where he suddenly out of nowhere busts out with all these moves, which I thought was quite a nice character to his more placid side. Saying that, he does cause a lot of issues throughout the film. He's basically the person who kind of like, you know, messes up the plot as much as possible to try and keep it moving. Grenzo Havoc Razor is the person I kind of have for him for that side of it. Not only is he a mercenary that has a load of troops that basically, whenever they hit, gain information and cause, cause upset within the troops. I like the fact that he goads your opponent's creatures, because he does essentially goad the boars into attacking him by wearing the hides of boars. Kind of that was not only to prevent them from smelling them, but also I think it's a bit of like a guerrilla tactic, essentially, to kind of instill fear into the enemy. I also have Domri Chaos Bringer for the same kind of reason. Not only does his ultimate create boars every turn, which represents his troops that he's bringing in, but his other two abilities are also kind of representative of his, as I say, the chaos that he brings. The first ability adds a mana and gives the creature a riot if you cast it on a creature spell, and his -2 goes to searches for creatures out of your library. So I do like this idea that he is an information peddler as well as playing kind of both sides. Because at the beginning we see him and he's nice and he's nice to Ashitaka, and it seems like he's going to be like a partner to him. And by the end of it, it turns out that all he wants to do is kind of watch the world burn because he just wants to get paid. Within that, he has he has a lieutenant who I've put for Sa'alin. Sa'alin's from the Eldraine set. It's a 4/4 first strike. When it attacks other creatures you control, get +1/+1. His flavor text is the thing that's interesting, though. The realm must never yield to the chaos of the wilds, which I think represents Jigo's side of things quite well. And his lieutenant has the same opinion. That they don't really care about the nature side of things. They don't care what they kill or how they get to their goals. They just want to get to their goals. So I think that's quite a nice theme there. I also have Uvenwald Tracker because again it plays into the fight mechanic from Neath, but also it looks a lot like his troops. Same with Loyal Retainers. There are two subordinates that he has at the end that are carrying the spirit of the Wild's head, right up to the last moment where everything's going to shit and there's a massive wave of basically when the spirit of the forest at the end dies, it creates a massive kind of chaotic, catastrophic event where there's all this sludge that essentially kills you and causes you to go into necrosis, and they right up until the end are willing to do Jigo's bidding. So Loyal Retainers fits for them, and I also put Boar Umber in because it represents the coats of the boars that they wear when they're hiding out, ready to pounce and ambush the boar tribe.
Nice.
So that's the Imperius. Did you have anyone for Jigo?
Yeah, mechanically completely not correct, but I like everything else about it. So I had Aki Lava Runner, which is a Kamigawa flip card. So Aki Lava Runner is a little goblin warrior. It's a red card with haste. And the artwork is, for the Aki Lava Runner, is just this little goblin dude, or Aki, which is the Kamigawa goblins, with a spear. And even just the shape of the face, because Jigo's character design, his face is very, kind of comes down in a big sort of almost like beak. His mouth's very angular, and he's got these big eyes, which is why I quite liked Aki Lava Runner. And then Aki Lava Runner flips into Tok Tok Volcano Born, which is a legendary goblin shaman. So shaman, monk, yeah, sort of similar, but again he's got the spear. He's this very goblin-y looking guy, and I like the fact that it's a flip card because, as you say, Jigo's personality throughout the whole film is one of a duplicitous nature and a character that reveals himself to have many more layers as he goes. So I liked this idea of someone who's seemingly inconsequential throughout the film becoming a very sort of key part of the proceedings. So yeah, Aki Lava Runner would have been
I do like that. Yeah. Oh, fantastic. Very cool. Okay, cool. So that's all the main human characters that we've seen. We're now going to look at the spirits and the spirit tribes. There are a few different tribes that are presented throughout the film. First of all, we're going to talk about the spirit of the forest himself. I have a couple of other cards within the set that within the deck that represents him at other points of the film. Marath obviously represents him in his kind of animal form. After he's been beheaded, I have Malignus as a representation. This kind of malevolent force of nature that's going to wants to destroy everything, and that's basically what happens in the film. The beheaded body continues to kind of live and continues to do things, and it basically goes on an absolute manic killing spree trying to get his head back, which, I mean, you would, obviously, you want your head back, I presume. So his power and toughness are equal to half the highest life total among opponents rounded down. Damage that would be dealt by Malignus can't be prevented. This unstoppable force of nature kind of represents him quite nicely. I like this idea of, a malicious spirit when it doesn't have the head to kind of tell it to be chill and calm. But then at the end, he gets his head back and everything kind of goes back to normal. I've got him as the voice of Resurgence, which not only visually looks a little bit like him already, but kind of protects whenever an opponent casts a spell during your turn, you get an elemental, and when it dies, you get an elemental. It's kind of at the end, it looks like the spirit dies. I think they say specifically he doesn't, but even when the carcass of his body kind of falls down, even if he is still existing within the spirit realm and everything, it does cause this massive regrowth over all of the areas that have been stripped back of all of their fauna and all of their foliage and everything in the name of industry. So I think that represents that idea at the end of the film of where the nature is taking back hold, and it kind of rectifies and as it has a resurgence. So I think that works quite nicely for the spirit of the forest for that part of the film. Saying that, we've also got there are two tribes that otherwise I'm going to talk about. The Boar tribe. When we first open into film, we see what we think is this horrible demonic thing. It's like almost like writhing spider of worms kind of thing. It's actually the boar god Nargo in a demon form. So for Nargo itself, I've put Ilhag to actually represent Nargo when he's not demonified, and then Decimator of Provinces to represent him when he is. Decimator of Provinces also kind of follows for Okoto, who's the other boar god who once Nargo dies comes to revenge him, comes to attack Lady Eboshi for what she's done. So Okoto is represented by Yashan, but again he gets corrupted. Same kind of thing happens. Turns out boars are very easily corruptible towards hate. That's a theme of the film. That's quite nice. But both boar gods end up going a bit monstrous. So Decimator Provinces covers both of that quite nicely. Also, I've got Rhythm of the Wilds in the deck. It shows Dormi on the back of a load of boars kind of charging at the camera. There's a part of the film where the boars go and attack all of the human side, so it kind of fits into that already, as well as the naming convention Rhythm of the Wilds fitting thematically into that as well. I also have the Gorilla Tribe. There's a small amount from the Gorilla Tribe that we see. They specifically talk about taking the power from the humans. So I've got Kogla in the deck. Not only are they quite aggressive, the Gorilla Tribe, they start throwing sticks of stones and everything at the wolves. So not only when it comes to does it fight, but also destroys artifacts and enchantments when it attacks, and also you can bounce humans back for them to get indestructible. So usurping a human gives them power. Kogla bounces a human to gain indestructible. Thematically, I think that works quite nicely. There's also Gorilla Shaman, who's a 1-mana 1/1 gorilla that XX and 1 to destroy. XX red to destroy an artifact of converted mana cost X. Still plays into that idea of them wanting to destroy and take the humans' technological advances for themselves to power themselves. Same idea because they are not pig-headed. That's the Boar tribe, but because they're quite hard-headed. I've got Clan Defiance also under Gorilla tribe. That's a red-green X spell that deals X damage to a creature with flying, X damage to a creature without flying, and X damage to a player. I thought that fit quite nicely for them. You don't actually see too much of either of them, so I didn't go crazy on the boar side. There's a few decks out there that have done Mononoke that have kind of put in people like Zertar Ancient and all of the other boars like Bristleboar and that kind of thing. I didn't do that. I just left them to have individual characters, and then didn't go much further than that. But in terms of characters, that's all of them. That's all of the different characters that we see. I've touched on all of the humans for the most part, and I've touched on all of the different tribes of the spirit side as well. So I think in terms of creatures and everything, we think we managed to catch pretty much everyone. The only other creatures I have in the deck are Kadama of the North Tree to represent the little Kadama spirits that we see in the forest. There's also Florahedron, Tangled Florahedron to represent the little dudes, because they have like little cute little rattlesnakey kind of head things. There isn't an obvious port into Magic with them. We don't actually have many like really cutesy kind of things. I did put Forbidden Orchard into the deck because when you tap it for any color, it generates a 1/1 spirit on your opponent's side. I thought that was quite nice. The idea that if you want to use a forest, you need to kind of it almost awakens up into these little spirits. I was originally going to put Dryad Arbor in the deck, which is a 1/1 forest dryad, so it's a land as well as being a creature. And I thought it was quite nice because the spirits, the little Kadamas do represent a this kind of marriage between the land and an animal kind of thing. But I mean, I think Tangled Florahedron, one side being a creature that taps for mana and the other side being a land, that's just as good without having the same downsides that Dryad Arbor can have. I also did put Kadama's Reach into the deck. Specifically, they gain passage through the forest by the Kodamas, allowing them to go through when Ashitaka saves one of the soldiers from Irontown and takes them back to Irontown. So I thought that fit the theme quite nicely there as well. So now we're going to move on to like a few thematics of the film and like the kind of cards that kind of round it all out. Because I mean, a lot of the characters themselves obviously are creatures. I didn't want it to just be a creature deck. I wanted some of the thematics of the film to be in there too. As I said, I did put things like Avenging Arrow to show when Ashitaka, fires his arrow early in the film. But I've also got a few other bits in here that kind of represent parts of the film. Greater Good is a great example of kind of what most of the people within the film want. They all have their own idea of what they think that is good and what the greater good is. For obviously, Lady Eboshi is looking beyond the whole, yes, I can understand destroying nature isn't good, but I'm also providing support and defense for my humans, for my populace, and the same with Ashitaka. If anything, understands this greater good through the entire film. He's trying to find a middle ground of peace. He wants to try and broker peace between these two factions because he doesn't understand why all this hate, why people think this hate's going to lead to anything but further destruction. And he is, for all intents and purposes, exactly correct. He's the only person you think you can look at and be like, yeah, of course, that makes a lot of sense. Why fighting doesn't help anything. What it does is cause destruction. Saying that we do have the spirit of the forest die towards the end before his resurrection. So the idea of sacrificing creatures to gain to gain power fits into this idea of Jigo and Eboshi, doing it for selfish reasons. Momentous Fall fits into this as well. This idea that when the spirit of the forest dies, and then Deicide represents this as well. When Lady Eboshi fires one of her rifles at the spirit of the forest, decapitating it. Saying that, I also have Artifact Mutation. Because just before she does so, the spirit of the forest looks at her rifle and it starts to sprout growths. And I'd like this idea of Artifact Mutation does this idea of when it destroys the artifact and it creates 1/1 saplings equal to its converted mana cost. So almost directly referencing that. I have a couple of things like, so removal spells were a little bit more tricky. As I said, I did have Avenging Arrow, but I also have Path to Exile. Okay, yes, it's one of the most premier removal spells, but Ashitaka specifically, when he gets corrupted by the Borgon at the beginning of the film, has to leave his village, and once you leave your village, you cannot come back within the lore of the film. So he is literally on a path to exile. He's also specifically leaving to find new lands into the east to find the reason for why the boar god was rampaging over towards his village. So not only is the path to exile in the name, but also this idea of the creature being removed and finding land, like mechanically the card does, fits into this idea as well. So sometimes you don't need to stretch too far to get your premier removal spells into your deck. In the same fashion, Swords to Plowshares represents this idea of why do we need hate? We should have peace, and it's quite nice. It presents like the ideology of Ashitaka, where he wants everyone, to put down their arms and to live harmoniously. So again, managing to fit the two best white removal spells into the deck without too much issue was quite nice. I have things like Gratuitous Violence and In the Web of War as enchantments that kind of represent. There are parts of the film where there is huge amounts of destruction. A lot of the boars are getting blown up by mines. A lot of the humans are getting attacked by the wolf. Like there's a lot of death in this film. So I think Gratuitous Violence fits quite nicely because, again, Ashitaka's point of view is that this violence is gratuitous. It's unnecessary. It is not needed. You don't need to be so hateful and aggressive towards each other when you could broker peace instead. But most of the factions don't listen to him. In the Web of War, the artwork of it specifically looks quite similar to the film. It gives whenever creature you control into the battlefield, it gets +2/+0 and haste until end of turn. This idea of furthering this aggression, and we are throughout the entire film in a web of war. It's very difficult for it to break down until the very end, where Ashitaka manages to break a peace between everybody. Permeating Mass is an interesting card. It's a 1/3 for a single green. Whenever it deals damage to a creature, that creature becomes a copy of Permeating Mass. This represents the spreading corruption. When Ashitaka tries to help the boar god, he ends up getting grabbed by it, and then the corruption spreads on his arm. This is what causes him to be exiled from his village and cause the whole chain of events to unfurl. I have a few bits after when the spirit of the forest is initially decapitated. There, as I said earlier, there is a big wave of there's a wave of vitriol, but I was going to put the card Wave of Vitriol into the deck, but I ended up putting a lot more non-basics into the deck, and I had a few other options that worked a bit better. I didn't want to load up on too many of them, so I put Creeping Corrosion, which is 2 green, destroys all artifacts, and Fracturing Gust, which is 2 Silesia in terms of hybrid mana for an instant that destroys all artifacts and enchantments, and you gain 2 life for each permanent that was destroyed this way. When the Spirit of the Forest gets its head reattached and collapses, it creates a massive shockwave, essentially a fracturing gust that blows through the entire town. So both of these cards, Creeping Corrosion and Fracturing Gust, represent this the bit of the Spirit Forest just before it's resurrected and just after it's resurrected. I've also put Anger of the Gods into the deck because, again, there's a spirit god that's very angry, and it goes around and it kills a load of things. So I think that works quite nicely within the theme of the deck. And Fires of Yavimaya. Again, we see parts of the landscape that are completely devoid of any trees or anything. They've been burnt down, they've been destroyed. So Fires of Yavimaya works quite nicely in that regard. It's an enchantment that gives your creatures haste. You can sacrifice it to give a creature +2/+2. The only other one for that was Explosive Vegetation. Again, at the end, once the Spirit of the Forest dies or returns back to nature, there's a massive upwelling of regrowth, and Explosive Vegetation kind of reflects that quite nicely. And
cool.
in terms of non-lands, that's all of them.
Nice.
Yeah. So we managed to get like a little bit of everything into the deck without any of it feeling too outside the film's ideology or too far outside of serviceable Naya, typical attacky creature deck. As I said with the Wave of Vitriol, I was going to try and go do a load of basics, and try and have as little non-basics as possible. Saying that, going through all of the Naya color lands, there's a lot of them that actually work quite nicely. So again, the thematics of the film, things like Reflecting Pool, Rift's Grove, and Fabled Passage, all look quite nice, and they'll fit the idea of when he's traveling through the forest and going to the Spirit of the Forest lake. There's otherwise I've rounded off the deck with a few basics, all of which I've taken the John Avon Unstable ones. Not only is the plains representative of the fields at the beginning from Ashitaka's village, the forest represents the Spirit of the Forest, forest, obviously. And then the mountain, the John Avon Unstable Mountain, represents the bit when the boars and the humans are fighting because they're up on the top of the big cliff, and it represents that quite nicely. Obviously, basics are up for interpretation, but I did try and go for one. So, I mean, also, I really like John Avon artwork. I also like the fact it was full art, and the colour quality of them reminded me a little bit of Ghibli anyway. So, yeah, that was a lot of words very quickly.
I mean, yeah, sure. It's a crazy thing with deck techs that you don't want to espouse so much on something, especially flavor deck techs, because you could talk about your reasonings putting in any one card for a whole hour. So yeah, you got to get through it quickly. Yeah. Do you have a deck list that we can put in the show?
I do, absolutely. What I'm going to do is I'm going to upload a lot of the justifications or basically all the different things that I've written in my cheat sheet and what I've written off today. I've got to transfer that into the description as well, so you have a bit of an idea. Because I struggled up until the end. I was looking at how you categorized and how you did in categories, and I'm not going to lie, I'm technologically inept. So it's not split up in the actual deck list itself, but it will be in the description, so you can kind of flex on the slots. You go, oh well, why is that in the deck? Okay, that's representing him. I'd rather have this person instead. There was a lot of cuts that I had to make. There was a lot of justifications I had to make for the cards that were going in. So there's a lot of wiggle room. There's a lot of interpretation that can be taken if you're building this yourself, or if you want to expand on it. Obviously, deck sets coming forwards might represent some of the characters a little bit better, or you might utterly disagree with what I'm saying, which is fine. But you can disagree with it on Tapped Out, and I will have a deck list, as you say, in the show notes for you to be able to check through.
Excellent. Well, that will probably have to be added after the episode goes live. So if you're listening to this and you haven't seen the deck tech in the description, the Tapped Out, it's probably because it's still being typed up, and we will add it later because we're wanting to get this episode out pretty much the same day that we're recording it, because we're all having life reshuffles at the moment. But yeah, I like it a lot. Princess Mononoke is one of my favourite Studio Ghibli films. It sits in that nice realm of fantasy, but also with real world sort of issues and kind of conflicts, which Miyazaki and Studio Ghibli does so well. Yeah, I really like it. I think I agree with almost every single one of those choices, and I like the fact that that you went for a lot of the spells as opposed to the creatures have a lot of very sort of direct references to the film. I think it's very cool, very good idea, and very different from my Eldritch horror deck tech, because it came with very different philosophies, which I quite like.
Yeah, we might have to build them and throw them against each other. But I mean, there's a couple of cards in here that are a bit. I was tend to put things like, oh, I'll just put Gaia's Cradle because it makes a lot of sense. And I'm like, if I ever want to build this deck, obviously no one can afford Gaia's Cradle, so I've tried to keep it like within the realm of actual affordability.
I think it's interesting with green cards, especially, is that there's a lot of films out there that if you were to do flavor deck techs, anything that has to do with nature or the kind of dichotomy between nature versus industry or humans versus the wilds, for example, that is essentially what green and green-red cards are all about in Magic as well. So those themes can kind of sync up really nicely, and therefore some of the more classically staple options, or maybe some of the more powerful cards in Magic, can flavorfully fit in green and red in almost any flavor deck tech, whereas black, white, and blue, like it was for my Eldritch horror deck tech, I think because a lot of the themes that are in Magic can sometimes be a lot more, not nuanced, because that makes it sound like green and red aren't nuanced, but they're sometimes a lot more niche, I suppose. You have maybe only like 2 or 3 options to go with. Interestingly, it's the characters, as you sort of were talking about them there, about the individual sort of protagonists and antagonists of the film. Those are the ones that you really need to kind of nail down with some sort of philosophy. Whereas the spells, yeah, I think Magic does a really good job of having these classic themes and flavors represented in their game, which is a good thing.
Yeah, I think spells in general, like it's a lot easier. Like lightning bolt's a bit more evocative than hey, core soldier.
Yeah, for sure.
So I think it's funny because I was going through, and if anything, I did keep a majority of creatures in the deck because I wanted it to be a creature-based deck. But my first draft of it was just as many non-creatures as creatures, and I had to cut down massively, and it was kind of difficult because, as you say, there was a lot of cards that I was like, yeah, but that fits this theme perfectly. But it turned out, I've already got that theme represented already. Like Ancient Grudge, for example, was my last cut from the deck, and the reason I kept it took it out was because I had Artifact Mutation kind of representing within the film a little bit better, whereas Ancient Grudge not only did fit the thematics of these warring factions against each other, but it also is nice efficient removal spells. So yeah, it was a little bit easier to cut the theme side of it, whereas the creature side of it, as I said, was a bit more nuanced, and obviously it was a bit more subjective. Like I had a few ones where I had 3 or 4 different choices. I'm still not entirely sure in a couple of them, but again, I tried to flex a little bit towards being mechanically viable as well, and seeing how the deck could potentially play out. So I did make some cuts based on that as well. Clearly, I wasn't at a loss for things to represent what I wanted, so it worked out quite nicely in the end. Yeah,
and also, future sets may yield results that could be slotted in. As we said, the Princess Mononoke card, which unfortunately, and this is something I completely didn't realize when you first pitched this. So, talking about Neth of the Dire Hunt, I was so sure that was a Naya card, that was red, white, and green. So when you went, I don't know if I can have Neth as the commander because it's only 2 colors. There was one time where I went, nah, you're talking shit. And I actually had to look it up. Because I thought the activated ability, a bit like Summit Voice of Dissent, was white. I thought it was a Gruul card with a white ability, but it's not. It's a green card with a red one. So yeah, it's interesting. We'll see what future sets yield. I mean, Commander Legends will most likely have cards and legendaries that will fit into so many flavor deck techs over the years. And yeah, if artists like Magali Villeneuve can draw inspiration from these stories that are now such a big part of fantasy pop culture, in the future, we may have direct analogs for a lot of stuff.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, yeah, we've seen obviously with the last month, we've got other IPs kind of drifting in, and it's funny that it is also a Toho property, so I could see Ghibli. I could see it porting quite easily and quite nicely. I don't think many people because it is very universally liked, and obviously it is an Asian inspired. Whereas I know that Magic the Gathering isn't necessarily an Asian game. It does feel a little bit, because it's like Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh. Trading card games in general tend to feel a little bit more on the eastern side of things rather than the western side. So I'd like to see. I don't know if they necessarily would do a direct port, but it would be quite cool. Again, alterations are very possible. And if anything, when I realised I had to go outside my initial ease of just make a Gruul deck, fine. It actually it not only expanded my ideas in terms of having to be a bit more careful about my choices and having to then go and go into the think tank, but it also gave me a whole nother color to play with. This is why when earlier I was talking about maybe using Marath or using Omnath, it's because it would have given me more colors to play around with. But if anything, that would have been an even bigger headache. So limitation does breed creativity.
And that's the exact sentiment, which is why I think if they were, say, in the future to do a Studio Ghibli secret lair or whatever, I'm not sure I would be as excited about it, even though it's an IP I enjoy, as say someone going, well, this is my Mononoke deck with Naeth at the head, or this is my Mononoke deck with, you know, Marath at the head, or, you know, whatever, like Howl's Moving Castle with Joda Eternal Archmage, or whatever else, you know, because that's where the creativity comes in. I think, for me personally, say these Walking Dead cards, I know I don't want to like talk about them too much, but if someone did like a Rick deck and then the rest of the deck was them, like, you know, fitting things into how they wanted flavor wise, that would be far more interesting to me than if they printed, say, 100 Walking Dead cards in white that could just be the deck off the bat.
Yeah, exactly. No, I know exactly what you mean. It's exactly that. You don't want the options decided for you. You want inspiration and provided for you. And I think, that's exactly the point of where, as soon as I saw this idea of this hint of Mononoke and Naeth, I was like, cool. And that's where my creative build minds then started to go a little bit wild, because then I'm like, oh, well, this can represent this, and then this can and this is where your own artistic interpretation can start to flex. Whereas if it's dictated to you, that's really not as fun at the end of the day. I mean, obviously that's again a subjective opinion, but realistically it's quite nice for someone who wants to build a theme deck to have the theme not quite so obviously presented in front of me, because it allows me to have an interpretation that feels like it's my own.
Indeed. Well, that was pretty awesome. I can't wait to have a closer look at the actual list and sort of wrap my head around it a little bit more. But yeah, brilliant. Guys, if you want to talk to us about any of the flavor deck techs that you've been brewing, because I know there's quite a few people out there that have already talked to us that have their own ideas about what they would want from a flavor deck tech. And indeed, on that Twitch post that Nathan mentioned, there were some really cool ideas about what we could do as a Princess Mononoke flavor deck tech, then do hit us out on Twitter. So that's at mtflavouring. My personal Twitter is at AndyManface. Nathan's, yours is
at the Fox in the Moon.
Emails go to mtflavouring@gmail.com. You can find us on YouTube at Magic the Flavouring on YouTube. Nice and creative title there. I will be eventually turning this episode into a video, and I'll also be doing that with the Eldritch Horror deck tech that we've already done. I'm really digging doing these deck techs, so if you guys out there have any ideas for deck techs you'd want us to maybe have a crack at, maybe there's an IP that you really enjoy, or a character from a TV, film, book, show, whatever, then let us know and we can perhaps do something in the future. Otherwise, we're just going to keep going on about, you know, anime and sci-fi. That's probably just what we're going to be doing all the time. I'm already in my head building my Howl's Moving Castle list. That may be a future. Yeah, I mean,
we could just do the Ghibli films, really, couldn't we? Because there's a good selection across the board for them. I wouldn't mind doing like a Ponyo one, because you could then, because obviously it's about the sea. That'd be quite cool.
Yeah, exactly. Well, but do we do Tales of Earthsea?
Oh yeah.
Technically,
yeah. Well, again, we let us know in the comments whether or not you think it's appropriate.
I think Tales from Earthsea is.
I count that. Yeah, I count that.
I do, but do you know what? I watched it and I didn't hate it as much as everyone else seems to hate it. It's got Timothy Dalton and what's his face? Who plays the Green Goblin in the first Spider-Man film?
Willem Dafoe. Willem Dafoe, yeah, exactly.
Yeah. It's got a great cast in the English-speaking version. I enjoyed it. I don't know. Some people don't like it. And also,
I'm a big fan of anime, especially that style. Regardless, like you could make a pile of slurry, and I'd probably still watch it. If it was style.
I mean, also, if we're getting super technical, if we did Studio Ghibli, we couldn't do Nausicaa, Valley of the Wind, because it was made before Ghibli was actually a studio.
I know. Or whatever. Well, whatever. It's our podcast. We do what the fuck we want, Andy.
All right. Well, I think that's probably going to be your any final things to say is we do what the fuck we want, and that's fine. Guys, other than that, thank you so much for listening. This has been Magic the Flavouring.
We'll see you soon.